Hello again. I'm in the process of cutting out all my bodice pieces for my dress, and I wanted to have a chat with you about under construction and linings and all these sort of things. With this dress, it's not a strapless dress, so I don't want it to have in a corset structure. I want this to be quite summery, quite light to wear. However, if I just made it, for example, out of organza, very much like Molly Goddard does, it becomes very floaty, but at the same time it's very hard to do fitting, and shaped seams are awful to stitch. You need the French seam more. So the options then, of course, is just to use a normal lining fabric for your dress, but that is then very slinky, and I want this dress to be sort of effortless, but I also want it to have some body. I don't want it to stick to me, which of course, if you use like a silk or something cut on the bias, that's what you want. You want it to mold itself to you. With this one, I want it to sort of look like something you just throw on, but it has enough of its own body that it doesn't sit flat against the body. So what I've experimented with, I'm using, and this is where you you can buy very expensive interlining fabrics, or you're like me and you find stuff which is similar, but what I'm using is a linen cotton, so it's always hard online. You can see it's got a nice sheen, but you can also see it's quite stiff, and that's what I want. I want something which is incredibly lightweight. This is a bit like a more like a thicker organdy. So organdy is like an organza, which is stiffer. It's a cotton version of organza. This one is some sort of linen cotton mix. So it's got that linen again, has a beautiful stiffness and a shine, really fine linen. So it's got that sort of feel. So it's a cotton, it's very thin, it's incredibly lightweight. So if I start mounting that or flatlining it onto my organza, you can see it's very light still, but it just stays up more. So I'm going to use this as a sort of flat line, like an interlining, but I'm going to just stitch it to my organza and treat it as the outer shell. And if you know, this is something I actually bought for my collection at university. So I know it works really well because I've used it a lot. But if you're a bit unsure, if you go into like a specialist shop, it's something like a they call it a tailoring canvas, and you get contour canvas, which is much thinner, but these are all quite thin but stiff fabrics. So that's where you need to sort of look in that department of interlining. But at the same time, sometimes you can also just go somewhere and just pick out something which is sort of has the same qualities you want, whether that's just silky, whether it's stiff, fluffy to give it body. Like for example, if I mounted the organza on like a really lovely thick wool, again it will have a completely different effect. Or like Chanel jackets are always interlined with an organza, so the wool gets a bit of very lightweight support. So there's lots of options of playing around, and that's one of the things where it's quite interesting to see how other people do it, whether it's in YouTube videos or books. The thing I also had to consider, I just thought about, is of course my fabric is see-through, so this light in the cellar is not very good. So I actually had to go upstairs into daylight, because this looks very yellow, but it's more like a parchment color upstairs. So of course, if I put my rose print on this, it's going to look completely different than on, for example, a pure white. So these are all the considerations you have to do. And of course, my fabric is completely see-through, but even if you have, for example, not a sheer, but something which is slightly see-through, you know, through light, for example, if you have blue fabric and you line it in white, it's going to be lighter than if you line it in blue. So stuff like that you only find out by experience, because you do it and then it isn't just quite the right color, or it's suddenly much paler or colder. So at the same time, for example, if you have a sort of pinkish color and you underline it in a red, it's actually going to be really rich. If you underline it in a blue, it's going to be colder. So you can use basically like painting with your fabrics. When I was trying to pick this fabric, I also did some experiments. That's always worth doing, because sometimes you know, each fabric reacts differently. So what I did is I just stitched my organza and my linen mix together, and you can see if I was the edge of the dress, it sort of stands up by itself, and that's what I want. It's still quite thin, which is why it's a second experiment, because I was very lucky that I was taught by somebody who worked at the Dior couture rooms in Paris for a while, and she taught me that she knew all about interlining, but she said one really good trick is if you have something which is quite stiff but fluid, like organdy or like a linen, if you interline it with a really cheap viscose crepe, of course Chanel poly or silk crepe, then it gives a bit more body and roundness. And you can see if I hold them up, you can see this still has the lovely stiffness, but it's a little bit rounder. Can you see this is sort of more, a little bit floppy still. This sort of suddenly becomes very soft, even how it folds. And it's impossible to see online, but in real life, it's just got that slightly more softness and more body. And it's a way of using quite a, for example, if you're making a skirt out of a linen, and it looks quite cheap, and it sort of just folds. If you interline it with something like that, it suddenly gets body. So I really like this, and it works. The only thing I'm worried about, but it's quite heavy. It doesn't make sense, but these are both very lightweight fabric, and this is suddenly, it feels like it's nearly double the weight. So I think for this dress, I'm going to not interline it with the crepe as an extra layer. I'm just going to use my 2 layers and then line it in a very, very lightweight silk. But I think I'm going to do if I turn it like that, I think I'm going to do the skirt lining in a very fluid silk, because then that will give it like a really nice flouncy bounce. I don't want it to be big, which can happen with organza if you underline it in organza. So I'm going to use quite a fluid lining for my skirt, so it has a body but it drapes, because I don't want a big skirt. So these are the things that you sort of have to learn. You have to also have the knowledge and bring it all together. So I'm now going to continue cutting out, and then we can stitch it all together.